Hello and welcome to the virtual towers of Binary Arcadia, where the games go on long into the night. Hello BArcadians, you're joining us today where we'll be talking all things the original Last of Us. It's a preparation piece for content upcoming for The Last of Us 2, which is out later this year. Unfortunately it has been delayed, I think a couple of months, but Naughty Dog are obviously taking a bit more spit and polish to it to ensure it's the best game possible, which is great to see. So what can you expect to hear in today's video? So we're going to be talking all about the original game, the setting, the characters, the infection, just all things scene setting to basically prep us for The Last of Us 2, or Last of Us Part 2 as it is known.
And just to butt in, Rich, we're going to be painting broader brushstrokes. So we're not going to go into the granular details of, every character in the game and every piece of narrative. We're just going to be looking at it, kind of in broader terms to give everybody a quick, recap on what it was all about as we plough into the sequel.
And as usual, and you can imagine with this kind of video, there will be minor to major spoilers ahead. So if you haven't played the game and are planning to play the game in preparation for The Last of Us Part 2, tune out now. If you have played it or you're not planning to play it, continue on.
I can't double down on that enough, BArcadians. I absolutely, you should play this game yourself and you should experience every moment naturally as part of that compositional piece that Naughty Dog put together. So, not to demote our own video, but yeah, please do check that out because, we're going to be cutting through context. We're going to be kind of giving you a whistle-stop tour, which is certainly going to undercut the actual experience of playing it. So yeah, I'm a big proponent. Get out there and play it now, then watch the video.
And the more keen-eyed among us will have seen that Tabs is standing by at the flip chart with some of his incredible artwork, and I'd just like to say thanks, Tabs, for your continued work with the artwork on the flip charts.
Thanks, mate. I do my best. I'm not just doodles, really.
So, The Last of Us. That's where it all began. So first flip chart, as you can see, is a title page, The Last of Us Part 2. This won't be focused on that, as we've already said, but just that's what we've got upcoming. So that's a lovely little drawing Tabs has done, and we'll probably use that in future videos as our title page.
Yeah, this is a start of a series of videos essentially, really focused around The Last of Us Part 2, but of course today we're talking about the first game just as the natural bridge into the sequel. So yeah, you can see Ellie here playing guitar by the tree. If you haven't already, this exact picture pretty much I've copied in doodle form from the PS4 theme. So go check out our BA news video perhaps a week or so ago and get it downloaded.
Excellent. So on to slide number 1 or 2.
I shall rip away. Right, so what have we got here, Rich? I'll grab my trusty pencil as a pointer.
So The Last of Us was a new IP created by the Naughty Dog team, and it was developed alongside the Uncharted series. At its root, it's a third-person survival horror game wrapped around a beautifully written narrative experience, and it really is a beautiful game to play. I've played a little bit of it, and the little bit I've played is absolutely incredible, so I can definitely suggest that anyone who's not played it, definitely go and play it. I know Tabs, it's definitely one of your favourite games of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say the gameplay isn't exactly mind-blowing. It's very iterative and not particularly original, but it's all about that story, as we'll come on to.
And I think actually that's probably a really good indication of what you expect from Naughty Dog. They make fantastic narrative games, even if the gameplay is not the most dynamic you'll ever see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're all about the narrative and they're all about that storytelling, and Absolutely. They do that probably the best in the industry as far Absolutely. As that goes.
So, set the scene, Tabs.
Right, well, what have we got up in front of us? The text here reads 2033. Chaos reigns. So just to explain to everybody, The Last of Us takes place in the year 2033. You can see here, I've done my best to create this image of like a broken dystopian United States is what they're supposed to be. You can see the highway running through. You'd be forgiven for mistaking this as a Death Stranding scene. I promise this is about The Last of Us. And we've got our two protagonists, Ellie and Joel, there just walking along the side of the bank. So essentially, as we can move down this flip chart, you can see there's an ant here who's got mushrooms growing out of his back, and he's a little bit dizzy, as you can see by the stars around his head. What's happened is, and what this symbolises, is the cordyceps fungus, which actually has grounding in real life. It's a real type of fungus that in fact infects, I think, ants and other insects. And what it essentially does is it infects a live host in a kind of parasitic sense, and then slowly takes over their autonomy, and in fact controls them, I understand. So what Naughty Dog did, inspired by that idea, they've actually stretched that into the game, into this dystopia. So we're in 2033, and the cordyceps fungus has taken a grip of the United States, at least as far as we know. It's infected over 60% of the world's population, and in response to that, the world has changed dramatically, as we can see.
So within this dystopian world, a police state is in operation controlled by Homeland Security and the military. Ordinary law has been completely dissolved in favour of martial law, and the remaining population is constrained to quarantine zones in an attempt to keep them safe. It's a really dangerous world at this point, and contact with this cordyceps fungus will lead to infection, and then obviously the downward spiral for yourself. So the population is like isolated away from the areas of this virus, basically, or fungus, should I say.
So yeah, I mean, we've already mentioned that it's not too dissimilar to the likes of Death Stranding, and you know, there are a lot of parallels there. This is a dystopian world set in the future. There has been a major catastrophe which has put humanity at risk. Unlike Death Stranding, though, this version of the future has been stripped of its, technological advancement. It's certainly not the sci-fi dystopia we see in Death Stranding, and people are they're having to resort to crafting, to very rudimentary methods of survival, using whatever they can find. And you can see in this picture here, we've got broken down cars flipped over these highways. The world is absolutely crumbling, and the last thing anybody's really worried about is infrastructure. They're just trying to survive, as we'll move on to with the next slide.
So that sets the scene of the game world, in essence, but let's talk a bit more in depth about the cordyceps fungus and how it affects living beings in the world, or I guess humans in the world. I don't think it affects animals, does it, Tubbs?
No, at least not in the first game, not to my memory. So yeah, we've got at the top here, we've got clickers, which are the main enemies of The Last of Us, and we've also given us a zombie, because of course The Last of Us is a survival horror game, very much taking the torch from the likes of Resident Evil, but with their own spin. So yeah, clickers are not entirely different from zombies. As we know, zombies, they infect the living with a virus, which again robs them of humanity, reduces them to this kind of bestial state, and they do that via biting their victims. And it works the same way for clickers. They infect live victims, because it's a parasitic basis of a fungus, by biting them. And Rich, while we're talking about clickers, don't we have some footage to show the BArcadians?
Yes, so this is footage taken in-game from the game of an encounter with a clicker, so enjoy this.
Welcome back, BArcadians, and I hope you enjoyed that interesting footage of a real-life clicker. So yeah, what is unique about clickers compared with the likes of Resident Evil games and their zombie brethren? Well, clickers not only infect the CBI or cordyceps brain infection via bites, but also they essentially have stages of evolution. Not quite like Pokemon, unfortunately. As they change, their host becomes less human, and essentially this fungus, in a very physical way, just takes over them. And what it ends up doing is killing the host, and what at the same time disperses all of these fungal spores into the atmosphere, essentially, which again is another way for the fungal infection to spread. So yeah, as you can imagine, not only via physical biting but airborne dispersion, you know, this awful infection is absolutely got a vice grip on the United States. And that is why Ellie and Joel are in such a shit show in the year 2033.
So that covers off the main cordyceps fungus and the creatures that come from that and how the virus spreads. So let's now move on to the main protagonists of the game, including the antagonist that is the Fireflies. But firstly, let's start with Ellie and Joel, the main characters. Two survivors who find their stories intertwined after the US is brought to its knees by the spread of parasitic fungus known as the cordyceps. So the story essentially tracks Ellie and Joel's fight for survival as they seek out a safe haven and ultimately a cure for the cordyceps fungus. The game opens with something of a prologue to the preceding story. We are introduced to Joel and his daughter Sarah. I believe the game starts, correct me if I'm wrong, Tabs, in their house with this all starting to kick off.
Yeah, and Sarah is in fact the playable character initially. Which is, yeah, it's a really interesting way to set the scene, because it not only explains the cordyceps fungus and the effects that has and how it rapidly changes normal life to, you know, this survival mode for everybody, but it also gives us a lot of insight into Joel's personal tragedy, I suppose, and the traumatic events that set a real baseline for the game.
And actually within the first, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes, the game ramps up into this crazy, like, emotional moment for Joel where, you know, unfortunately the military, but basically they suspect that his daughter is infected, so they shoot her dead basically. And then
seemingly they're under orders to deal with, you know, who they suspect could be infected. You know, presumably they are the same military who end up, you know, basically reducing the United States to martial law. But yeah, as you point out, they shoot at Joel and his daughter Sarah. Joel reacts, tries to jump out of the way, but unfortunately Sarah does get caught in the crossfire and dies in his arms, essentially, which is a brutal way to start a game.
But I look at it and think it sort of instantly emotionally connects you with Joel. He's had this horrific like emotional tragedy happen to him, and it almost grounds him as a character. It makes him feel real in some way, and you understand why he is the way he is as the game moves forwards.
Well, yeah, this is it. I mean, we jump ahead after that, and we see that Joel is just trying to survive in this kind of police state situation in one of these quarantine zones. So yeah, Joel, he's done some awful things. He is basically doing whatever he can to survive and potentially thrive. He's involved in some slightly shady schemes. I think he's smuggling, and essentially, you know, since the death of his daughter, Joel has utterly lost connection with humanity. You know, he's just living life by the drop, each day as it comes. And, you know, what the story goes on to explore is, well, Joel's reconnection with humanity, with his feelings, with his emotions again.
Yeah, because Ellie, who is the other main character here, becomes Joel's almost antidote, or his saviour. Their connection seems to re-establish his connection with humanity and sort of brings him back round to the person he sort of was before the tragic death of his daughter. The game sort of follows that narrative and of their relationship and the struggles they go through throughout the game, in a search for basically a cure for this horrendous fungus, because it turns out that Ellie is actually immune to the cordyceps fungus, and it is through her blood, in essence, or her immune system, that they try to ultimately create a cure for this fungus.
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, but certainly we know that her biology is unique, and the fungus is not manifested in the same way it does for everybody else, which we'll come on to, resulting in this zombie-like state to people. And well, ironically, a story about somebody who's robbed of his humanity. Well, the cordyceps fungus itself also robs people of their humanity. But yeah, I mean, we find all this out because essentially early on in the game, Marlene, who understands the leader of the Fireflies. Now the Fireflies are like a paramilitary group who essentially have risen in opposition to the military takeover of this police state. That essentially they've hijacked the government and they have, absolute control of everybody. And the Fireflies actually, at least seemingly and ostensibly on the surface, they have good intentions. They want to return the world to ordinary law. They want to create justice again in the world and institutions that defend against justice, and essentially, get back to the civilization that we once knew and were ruled by. So yeah, that's the main aim of the Fireflies. Well, perhaps not the main aim. The main aim is also, as Rich points out, to find a cure for the cordyceps fungus. So yeah, that's kind of their double-pronged mission statement. Marlene is actually the surrogate mother of Ellie. And early doors strikes a bargain with Joel and his companion at the time. I think her name is Tess. Basically, Joel and Tess want to get their guns back, and Marlene says that she'll help out with that, but what she needs is for them to escort Ellie. I think it's across east, so the opposite way to Death Stranding, to Boston, and essentially to the Fireflies HQ, I think, because they have plans for Ellie.
Yeah, so where in essence they're hoping to harvest Ellie's genes, I guess, or blood, whatever it might be, to create a cure, in essence. Unfortunately, it transpires that in order to do this, Ellie needs to die. And in an act of self-sacrifice, Ellie says she's prepared to die to save the human race, which is an amazing sacrifice to make. But I think Joel basically doesn't want this to happen. He won't let it happen, basically, even though she's prepared to do this.
Yeah, Joel slips out of consciousness actually, and he emerges from that, and upon hearing the news from the Fireflies and Marlene that essentially Ellie is being prepped for this procedure, which is a very invasive surgery, essentially seemingly something along the lines of removing her brain or reverse engineering whatever is going on in her brain, because that's where the cordyceps infects, to try and find this cure. Because essentially I think Ellie actually has the cordyceps fungus, she is infected, but her biology has found a way to prevent it from, taking over essentially. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're trying to find out, but obviously to do that they essentially have to kill Ellie. Joel is pissed, but by this point in the game he absolutely loves her with all of his heart.
She almost becomes like the daughter figure to him, replacing his real daughter.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty to discuss there, because it's hard to say. There's questions over, and we'll come to it, the ending and exactly what motivates Joel. Because, it certainly is clear throughout the game he loves her and he wants to protect her. But there's certainly something going on, as we've pointed out. He has this kind of redemptive character arc. And I think he's probably in some way trapped in that narrative. because his daughter died and he couldn't save her, well, somehow this, to protect Ellie, is a second chance at making good on that, and perhaps giving him some sort of peace. And he just can't let go of it. So even though, as we later find out, Ellie is kind of up for dying, she says that, you know, if she can save humanity, and as, you know, basically in honour of all those people that have already died, friends, family, she is prepared to die for the greater good, if you like. And that actually brings us to the ending, because, well, as we find out, Joel kicks everybody's ass in the finale. Essentially, he rescues Ellie, who's totally out of it, and realising that she would be absolutely furious with the truth of the events that happened, because it's essentially saved her, but at the same time, you know, potentially prevented humanity finding a cure for CBI, or the cordyceps brain infection.
So, realising that Ellie will obviously be furious with the fact that she has stopped this surgery, which would have ultimately seen her die through the fact that her brain would be removed, he chooses to lie to her about what happened. He explains to her that she isn't the only person that is immune to the cordyceps brain infection, and that the Fireflies have stopped looking for a cure. In the final scene, Ellie challenges Joel's version of events, asking him to swear to her that it represents the truth. What?
That's right, and he does swear, and reluctantly, I think there's suspicion on her mind, she accepts it. I think on some level she realises that, you know, that isn't the truth of things, but it's a convenient and an easy truth to accept. Because she's probably in two minds as well. She wants to survive, of course she does, like anybody, but she, you know, really wanted to make a difference.
Well, I mean,
seemingly,
ultimately on a selfish level, she wants to survive, but on an unselfish level, she wants humanity to survive, and so it's a double-edged sword, absolutely.
Yeah, and yes, this is it. She's been through a great deal of trauma herself, and seen many a loved one die, probably graphically in front of her at times as well. So, you know, for her, with that burden on her mind, knowing what she knows or thought she knew about her unique biology, you know, of course she wants to give her life in sacrifice, so the rest of humanity can, you know, get out of this horrible, brutal way of living. And what it actually presents is a very interesting philosophical argument between two different types of, I suppose you would say, moral philosophy. One of them is like a consequentialist utilitarian argument, and that's presented or manifested via Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies. And essentially the bones of it is that Marlene believes that no matter what she does, her actions can be justified by their consequences, and her ultimate goal, which is to save humanity once they have this cure. So even though, you know, essentially she's party to this gruesome act of killing a young girl, you know, this invasive brain surgery, which will result in taking Ellie's life, she can justify that because it's a means to a morally good end, which is to save humanity, the greater good. So that's really very much a consequentialist utilitarian argument. What we kind of see from Joel's side is, and seemingly, and we'll come back to that, is what we call a deontological argument, deontology. A famous proponent of which is Immanuel Kant, and essentially deontology has a focus on moral decisions with specific reference to a moral code. So in Joel's sense, you know, each and every action has to be weighed in and of itself, of its moral value. And in this way, you know, Joel cannot look past the fact that they are killing somebody, you know, cold-bloodedly. Even though it's for the greater good, that action in itself is not morally good, and therefore we should not pursue that route. And just so you're aware, utilitarianism was actually founded by Jeremy Bentham. So if you wanted to go and check that out, Immanuel Kant, Jeremy Bentham, pour into it to your heart's content. It is quite interesting. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell, and you've got this really interesting philosophical quandary going on. Although I did mention before, we're not entirely clear, as Rich and I have discussed, exactly what Joel's motivations are. Is it simply the power of his love for Ellie? Is it this renewed grip on his own humanity, which is facilitated by his love for Ellie, which he just can't reason with? So in a way, is that a selfish motive? We've suggested it could be this deontological reasoning, although, if it's more of a selfish reasoning, it might not be that at all. Or is it, just a case, as we've mentioned, he has this overpowering desire to subvert the traumatic narrative of his life? Is this somehow a way to, pretend that the death of Sarah didn't happen, or to make peace with that, in a sense, via his retribution by protecting Ellie? I'm sure it's many of these things, and I'm almost certain the redemptive fantasy he has plays a big part of that. But I think it's just really interesting how Naughty Dog, they offer all these threads up, but they leave it quite ambiguous and ambivalent. Let you draw your own conclusions on the subject. I don't know about you, Rich. What do you think motivated Joel?
I feel like, from everything I've read, I've not played the game all the way through. I feel like it's a redemption mission for him. He feels like he didn't protect his daughter well enough in some respects, and his job as a father was to protect her and ensure that she never came to harm. And obviously he failed at that mission through no fault of his own, you could say. But I feel like the psychological scars,
the existential guilt of it. Yeah,
exactly. I think that drives him, and he's sort of taken that failure in his eyes, and he's transferred that into Ellie, as if I can get redemption by ensuring that Ellie's survival. That's my redemption for failing in protection of my daughter.
And the irony is as well that, and this is obviously going to carry over into the second game, he thinks he can, save himself by saving Ellie and make peace with that whole, the existential guilt he was dealing with. But what has he just done? Well, he's lied to the person he loves, probably the most in the world at this point in time. He's again giving up his humanity because he's lying to her. He's again having to deal with guilt because of his lie and the, essentially monumental proportions of that lie, because this has potentially robbed humanity of the cure to the fungus which has taken over the world. So it's weird how he's starting this narrative again in many ways of giving up his humanity.
I feel like he justifies any means to fulfill his mission of keeping Ellie alive. So lying, killing, whatever it may be, it's not important. The mission is important, or in his eyes, his mission is important.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? Because that's, we've talked about deontology and utilitarianism. Well, that's actually more in common with utilitarianism, because the means to protecting Ellie don't matter. The end is the only thing important to him, which is to protect and save Ellie. So yeah, it's an interesting exploration of philosophy. So yeah, that gives us an overview of the original game, The Last of Us. We cannot end this video though without giving you a glimpse at one of the most famous scenes in the game, the giraffe scene. And
actually, what people who've played The Last of Us hold up as possibly one of the greatest scenes in gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't express enough, just as we did at the start of the video, please, if you've got any ambitions at all to play this game, go and do it. It really should be appreciated as part of, again, this compositional piece, this ensemble that Naughty Dog have created, because its power is that much more impactful and poignant, as Rich says, because of how it arrives and the run up to that moment. Essentially, to try and describe it somewhat, the game up to that point is very bleak, very brutal, very much this constant fight for survival without much in the way of hope or happiness or positivity. And this giraffe scene just has an effect of, it's like an oasis in a desert. It gives you pause for a moment in this journey of struggle. You've suddenly got this natural beauty and seeing these beautiful animals thrive, seemingly. And it's just a very, very revealing moment. You know, and I was fighting tears myself when I first experienced it. So yeah, we'll run and play the clip for you just so you can see it, and I'm sure it's still very beautiful, but please do play the game because it's, you know, it's that much more impactful if you do.
You see this? Shh, don't scare it.
I won't.
What are you doing?
It's all right. Come here. Hey, fella. Hurry up, come on.
Hey there. So fucking cool. Aw, where's it off to? Here, come on, let's go.
Slow down, kiddo.
Come on. Hurry up, come on. Oh, man. Wow. Look at those things.
So, is this everything you were hoping for?
It's got its ups and downs, but you can't deny the view, though.
So that was the incredibly poignant giraffe scene, and I hope those that haven't seen that before really enjoyed that. As we say, this is the first in a series of content. Probably next up, although we haven't decided yet, maybe an analysis on some of the trailers we've seen from The Last of Us Part 2, which is upcoming in the next few months. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video. We've certainly enjoyed making it and talking about The Last of Us because it's a beautifully put together game. If you did like this video, definitely give us a like. It really helps bump us up the algorithms within YouTube. So give us a like, and if you're not subscribed and you've enjoyed what you've seen, get subscribed to the channel and click that bell for all notifications. And I think that's about all we've got time for. Another one for the archive.
Stamped and completed.